This is apropos. Well, after 15 months of bloodshed that's killed tens of thousands of Palestinians and inflamed the Middle East, negotiators have reached a phased deal to end the war in Gaza. The complex accord outlines a 6-week initial ceasefire phase and includes the gradual withdrawal of Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip and the release of hostages taken by Hamas in exchange for Palestinian prisoners held by Israel. The deal, which is set to take effect on Sunday, will flood desperately needed humanitarian aid into a devastated territory where medics say more than 46,000 people have been killed, over half of them women, children and the elderly, as Antonia Kerrigan reports.
After more than 15 months of war, an ever-mounting death toll and a narrow strip of land laid to waste. On the 14th of January, Gaza's health ministry said at least 46,645 people had been killed and 110,012 injured. It says more than half of the victims are women and children. But a study released in early January by peer-reviewed medical journal Lancet found that casualties in just the first 9 months of the war were underreported by 41%. With deaths already at 64,260 by the end of June 2023. The United Nations estimates 1.9 million people in Gaza have been displaced at least once. That's 90% of the population. Given the sheer destruction, many now live in tents. UN satellite imagery from September showed more than 65% of structures had been damaged. That's some 163,700 buildings. Gaza City, in the northern part of the Strip, is the worst affected, with more than 36,000 buildings damaged. A satellite assessment from July estimated the war had generated about 42 million tonnes of debris. That's 14 times more than all of the debris produced by the other conflicts in Gaza since 2008. By August, the UN satellite images showed 70% of Gaza's roads damaged, a factor that has complicated deliveries of humanitarian aid, while the WHO says that only 16 out of the Strip's 36 hospitals remain partially functional. The Israeli army claims to have killed some 17,000 to 20,000 militants from Hamas and other groups since the start of the war, but Israeli media have questioned the veracity of these figures, suggesting the army may not have always distinguished correctly between, quote, terrorist and civilian. Hamas losses include several brigade commanders and dozens of battalion commanders, as well as Yahya Sinwar, chairman of the Hamas Political Bureau and mastermind of the 7th of October attack. Meanwhile, at least 405 Israeli troops have died in operations inside the Strip and on the border since the beginning of the war.
For more, we're joined now by Oliver McTernan, an experienced mediator, commentator on Middle East affairs and founder of the charitable organisation Forward Thinking. Thanks so much for being with us on the programme this evening. As we've been saying, there's limited detail at this stage about what exactly is going to happen in later phases of this deal. Are you confident that the ceasefire will hold? Is it too early to say?
I'm afraid it's far too early to say. And even now, we're getting contrary briefings. I've just listened to a briefing from the Israeli Prime Minister's office, and David Mercer was saying, oh, but Hamas haven't agreed yet to the treaty. He was trying to justify why his Prime Minister hadn't agreed. So I think when you're getting this sort of confusion, our hope is that it will hold, of course. Those frightening statistics we've just heard from your report underline the need, not just for this temporary pause as it is in the fighting, but for a permanent ceasefire and a determined effort to find a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
And Oliver, once everything is in place and it comes into effect on Sunday, how is this deal going to be enforced? What kind of mechanisms will be in place to make sure both sides actually adhere to the terms?
It's very difficult to know. We've heard the Qataris explain that there will be monitors and so forth. But for me, what I can grasp of what's being revealed so far, I fear it is almost a spoiler's dream that is on offer. because you're going to have an interaction between the Gazan population still and Israeli forces in parts of Gaza. Now, for spoilers, that will give on both sides. On the Palestinian side, there are people who've made a lot of money out of this war, gangs that have been raiding food and so forth. They will look for ways, I think, of spoiling the agreement. Secondly, on the Israeli side, there will be people in the IDF, and always have been, who are ideologically opposed to any sort of rapprochement or agreement with Palestinians, and again will look for opportunities to spoil it. So I think we're in for a bumpy few months ahead. But the quicker we can get to a permanent ceasefire and, as I say, a determined effort to once and for all address the root causes of the conflict, which is occupation, then I think we're still, in these uncharted waters.
And Oliver, Joe Biden mentioned earlier that this is more or less the same deal that was on the table back in May. So why this breakthrough now? Donald Trump also very quick to take credit for this agreement.
And I think he's probably right in taking credit. We've seen for the past 15 months that Joe Biden gave total support to Benjamin Netanyahu and his war effort. There was no red lines, in Biden's word, between America and Israel. Now, Biden this evening was trying to say, well, it was that pressure that has brought Hamas to the table. I would profoundly disagree with it. I think it was the pressure up till now, the military pressure, that has actually prolonged us reaching a ceasefire and a new direction in this conflict. The Trump factor is, I think Donald Trump was determined to pick up where he left off 4 years ago. And if you recall, 4 years ago, his big project in the region was promoting the Abraham Accords. He saw this as a way of bringing the region together for economic benefits. He saw if they could get the Abraham Accords up and fully functioning, then it meant big dollars for the American economy. And I think Trump has let it be known two things: that he is determined not to inherit conflicts. So he must, I think, have put pressure on Netanyahu to finally agree to a ceasefire and hostage exchange. But also, I think, to move forward in the way of seeing how this original Trump plan of 4 years ago can now be implemented.
And Oliver, what next for Gaza and for people there? Huge tasks lie ahead in terms of getting humanitarian aid back in, rebuilding communities, reconstructing facilities. And who is going to oversee all of this?
Well, again, this is so uncertain. Who's going to govern Gaza? Is still an open question. About a month ago, the Egyptians proposed that there should be a 15-person local government, people who would be respected within the community in Gaza, being given the authority to govern. Well, that's fine, but you need more than just people governing. You need some sort of security structure. And as far as I can see, no thought has been given to what type of security structure will now work within Gaza. We've seen where, the Hamas police have not been able to operate, or the Gazan police, I would stress, because they're not all Hamas. Where they haven't been able to operate, we see how gangs exploited the situation. Now, I think unless there is some serious thought given to how this is going to be governed and particularly how it's going to be policed internally, I think we're at enormous risks are clear.
And our previous guest, Scott Lucas, we spoke to him a little bit earlier in the programme. He was talking about the West Bank also, suggesting that perhaps hostilities might be transferred there. We saw already this evening, within nearly minutes of this deal being announced, that 5 Palestinians had been killed there in an Israeli airstrike. So what happens with the West Bank with all of this?
Well, again, the whole place is volatile. I think, 2, 3 years ago, it was very predictable that there would be an explosion. I actually thought it would take place on the West Bank. I was surprised in the manner of October the 7th. But the depth of frustration, of lack of a future vision, is such that you're going to inevitably have violence. And I think there are elements within Israel that don't see the root cause of this is the ongoing occupation. They prefer to think that they can manage this by oppression. Well, I fear the last 15 months has shown that that is not the case.
And what about Hamas? Netanyahu has said all along this war isn't going to end until Hamas is completely wiped out. We had the US Secretary of State saying yesterday that actually it's been recruiting nearly as many people, as many fighters as have been killed. So what kind of position is Hamas currently in? Its senior leaders clearly have been wiped out, but you can't wipe out an ideology.
You're right. But I think Hamas isn't so much an ideology, it's a resistance movement. It's a response, and it uses Islam as its point of reference, as Christian sometimes use just war theory as a point of reference. But I think it's important that as long as occupation is there, you will have resistance, whatever the name. Today, it may have the title Hamas. Tomorrow, it'll have some other title. What needs to be addressed now is the recognition that unless we're going to end occupation, give Palestinians the rightful state, that both sides will not have the security they deserve.
Oliver, we'll have to leave it there for now, but we do really appreciate your time on the programme. Thanks for being with us this evening. That's Oliver McTernan, commentator on Middle East affairs and founder of the charitable organisation Forward Thinking. Well, that's it from us for now.